situated here. It's what? Yes. And by the way, I should mention that because mine's on as well, is that your microphones are live and this is televised. And so if you can't make the meeting, you can always turn it on and watch it on your computer, but these mics are live.
Good evening, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Note that quorum is currently 10 members. It is Tuesday, July 16th, 2024. Call this meeting to order. And since this is only our second meeting, can we go around and introduce ourselves? I am Vanessa Jenkins.
I'm John Pacheco. I'm a council member for District 5.
Lila Eltwili, Enterprise Equity Senior Manager.
Brittany Clausen, South my district.
Leah Goldstein Moses, District H.
And I'm Dr. Carter. I'm the council member for District 3. Glad to be here.
Mitchell Hansen, glad to be here as well, at large.
Michael Sunny.
Mercedes Jarbo. I represent Rondo, whatever district it is.
Tori Hampton, Equity, also here in LEO.
Anita Rena Davis.
Dr. Abdullahi, representing District E.
Samira Asa, from Bloomington, I forgot the exact numbers, but yeah, that area, Mall of America.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. First order of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
State your name for the record.
Leah Goldstein Moses, I move to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
And state your name.
Anita Rena Davis, I second the motion to approve.
Yeah, let me move down for you.
All in favor of adopting the agenda?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Next, you can see we are co-chairs, and so we're going back and forth, and so we're getting it together right now, so. Makes it easier, actually. So at this point, we'll approve the minutes from the last meeting, the June 18th meeting. I entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting. Anyone want to make a motion?
So moved.
So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, that's Dr. Tyrone Carter who made the second, and Anita Irvina who made the motion. All right, any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Pass, or say no objections, so motion passes. At this time, we also have an opportunity for the public to speak. It says 3, but it says 5, but we actually, at the council meetings have 3, we'll sort that out. But people can come here on the day of the meeting and sign up to speak. We don't have that many, but every now and then we do. And we do the same thing at the full council meetings. When people have to speak there's some rules to get to when you can speak and what subjects we can cover, but we're working on that as well. So at this point, do I have anybody from the community that would like to speak at this time? Seeing none, then we'll move on. Thank you. Agenda. Now we have to move the. Oh no, this is the wrong section again. There we go. All right, now. All right. So now we're moving to the information section of this, and we have 3 great presentations. I've looked at some of the materials before, and things come before us. This is a great lineup. And so at this point, we'll start with the Regional Development Guide overview and update.
It's on
I'll just move this in front of you.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Barajas. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Division. It's my pleasure to be in front of you today, and I'm joined by my colleagues.
Hi, Charles Carlson, Executive Director, Metropolitan Transportation Services.
And I'm Lisa Thompson, General Manager for Environmental Services.
So we're here today to talk about our Regional Development Guide, which is our long-range plan. Regional Development Guide is what the statute says. Thanks to our lawmakers for giving us unapproachable language. But we want to talk to you today about where we're at in our planning process. This is work that the council has been engaged in for several years now because it's a long process. But also because we cover a very large region of almost 3,000 square miles. So, and a lot of residents that are a part of that work. So we have some baseline. I know for some folks, Regional Development Guide will be like all new concepts. So we have some base level information to help build that understanding. And then we want to give you some updates on where we're at in the process today and where we are going forward. But really wanted, and then we really will be setting the stage for the next presenters will be talking about the environmental justice framework as well. And so today, again, like I said, wanted to focus on starting off with just some background on regional planning, why we were authorized by the state to do this work and what we're meant to cover, and then updates in each of our policy areas where we'll be tag teaming on providing those updates, and then we'll close off with some what our timeline toward adoption or upcoming public comment periods look like, and all the fun stuff at the tail end of our conversation. And of course, would love to hear from you on this work too. So when the council was formed, this is a little bit of a history lesson, so forgive me if you're like, oh, history wasn't my favorite subject, but it does help give us context for why the council exists as an organization. The council was formed in 1967 really to handle the regional systems, wastewater, transit, transportation, and regional parks in certain form, but doing long-range planning efforts to really help coordinate all of that work. As going into the 70s and with continued development happening locally, there was still a lot of public conversation and civic engagement around we're not quite making that connection to local decision making to what's happening across the region. And there was a lot of national conversation about the role that regions could play in managing growth within these larger metropolitan areas versus all local governments acting independently and sometimes collaborating, but maybe not always. So it was leading up to that and through a series of reports that the legislature ultimately adopted was the Metropolitan Land Planning Act. They had already directed the previous forms of the council when we were independent agencies to already plan for the regional systems and to coordinate those plans together, but managing growth across the region was, and making that connection between those regional systems and local decision making was what was missing. So in those years, the region continued to grapple with how to actually handle growth and development across the region. And in 1976 is when the legislature ultimately adopted the Metropolitan Land Planning Act with these findings that you see on the left, that the region is comprised of really interdependent communities, that individual communities impact the region's infrastructure, and that decisions made by one community impact communities not just next to them, but across the region. That continued growth in the region created a need for public services and coordination of public services and shared services across the region, and that there was an increased risk of air and water pollution and a risk of water supply shortages. Now, the reasons for those risks were different, but those risks still live with us today and still are issues that I know my colleagues will talk about and their portions. And then that all of those findings were led to them saying that, so because of that, the council should be taking on these efforts to develop a long-range plan to ensure the coordinated, orderly, and economical development of the region. Those are those words, but they're really core to how we think about delivering infrastructure and managing growth in the region. And then, of course, to protect the public health, safety, and welfare, which is pretty core to local governments across the nation. You don't need to read this all, but very specifically, the legislature does tell us that we have to create a regional development guide. Our current guide is Thrive MSP 2040. It's very clear that we should be guiding where development happens, public and private, across the region. We do that in a number of different ways. But we also must recognize and encompass, in the green letters there, physical, social, and economic needs of the metropolitan area. So while we are really focused at our foundation around the regional systems, the delivery of transportation and transit and wastewater infrastructure and sort of that built environment, the legislature did recognize that need and directs us to consider those physical, social, and economic needs as well. New language that the legislature added to this work just in the 2023 session is in the blue text. While we were always directed to include matters such as land use, parks and open space, and land needs, the necessity for airports, highways, transits, etc. In the 2023 session, they also added that we must include things like climate mitigation and adaptation. That was not previously defined in the law. It was work that we were already doing. It was included in Thrive MSP 2040, but there was much more detailed description that the legislature included in our direction in this 23 session. So building off of all of that work, as the council began undertaking this work, starting with a regional vision, we spent a lot of time in engagement, but also in looking at what local governments have also adopted in their plans as vision statements for their communities. And there were a lot of themes all across this region, not just for resident engagement, but also in local adopted plans that really helped to inform where the council landed with this endorsed vision about creating a prosperous, equitable, and resilient region with abundant opportunities for all to live, work, play, and thrive. I think abundance was something in particular, and certainly council members, I let you speak to that, but I do recall just how important that the word abundance was to folks, because we have been in many ways often thinking about living in times of scarcity when we are a relatively wealthy nation, and with a scarcity mindset often thinks that we don't have the resources to tackle the issues in front of us today. So I just wanted to call special attention to that word. It was something that stuck with me, even though it was work that we've been working on for years, but it was something that I just wanted to draw attention to. As we work through that vision statement and then working on regional goals, again, building off of what we've been hearing through engagement, and also what building off the work that we started in Thrive MSP 2040, as well as what we're hearing from local governmental representatives in their comprehensive plans and what they're saying are their goals or issues that they're trying to tackle. We work with our council members to develop regional goals that are at a level that really are cross-cutting in nature. What are we trying to accomplish that impacts all of us across, not just across the region, but impacts each of those elements that I have on our slide earlier today. And on the flip side also, that we have the ability to advance these regional goals when we all work together on those things through housing, land use, transportation, water, and that we're in parks, and that we're addressing that work together. So these are the 5 regional goals. I have the equitable and inclusive goal highlighted in particular for you all. It is something that really is at the center of our work, and while all of the goals are important, the way that our teams have worked to build frameworks on which to center our work has, at the beginning of this process, has really permeated throughout. And so I want to talk a bit about that. This first framework is our equity framework, where our grounding concepts are, the way we approach our work, are that we are contextualized, community-centered, and reparative. And this is done in working with community, where issues and ideas are identified through that community engagement. We might already know of that because we've heard that through our engagement over the years. We weren't starting from zero when we started this process. We were regularly engaging residents, visitors to the parks, our customers on transit, our the folks we serve through our housing authority on a regular basis. And so taking what we're learning from our processes already, hearing that is one place that we start, but also being open to hearing more about other issues that we may not know already or may not have already heard from others. And then building like, well, how did we get here? What does that mean for us? What was the context around where that issue came from? What's the history of that issue? Because we can't presume to have any sort of solution if we don't understand how we got there to begin with. But the reason community is in the center of this process because it is centered around community. It's not that we have all of the solutions, but that we're working with those impacted populations to co-create those solutions, to generate new ideas, to think about how we do our work differently, how we might think about partnerships differently, how we might approach issues in a way that we haven't approached them before. And then, of course, the whole idea that we aren't just fixing a problem, but that we are repairing where the sources of the issues and thinking about how we move forward better than where we started. So I'll jump into land use policy and give you a brief update on this, and then we'll be tag teaming on the other topic areas as well. One of the things we do around land use in particular, and I want to distinguish between what the council does and what local governments do. Local governments do your permitting for that development that's up the street from you. They do the zoning, they do their comprehensive planning. At the regional scale, we're managing growth and thinking about and providing direction and encouragement, support, and technical assistance to local units of government for regional goals, for how they might achieve regional goals in their local plans. In this process for 2050, we really took a people-centered approach to this work. In the past, the council's work really focused on just the partnership with local government. They're a primary customer, they're the implementer of our processes. They have to apply to us for things, we review their plans. But in this process, we really broadened that and started with people first. To elevate the voices, especially of underrepresented communities, because we know even in local plans, even despite best efforts, that communities in local comprehensive planning processes aren't always fully represented or participate or have the opportunity to participate in those processes and shape those plans. We also value that feedback with equal measure to everyone else we hear, whether it's on a formal committee or someone who's been elected, but that lived experience is so important to how we actually build and frame our work. And then, of course, that we're considering that individual experience within the built form, that we aren't just managing a region, but this is where people live. These are their neighborhoods, these are their workplaces, and this is how they get around. And this is the decisions we make at the regional scale and the supports that we provide to local units of government are the things that create the places and the neighborhoods that we live, work, and play within. And so what you see here on our slides are really our focus for 2050 around managing that growth in a responsible and respectful manner. We've spent a lot of time engaging with the American Indian Advisory Council leaders from across the region around the importance of land and water and that respectful relationship. And as an organization that's responsible for land use planning, we really took that to heart. We really also focus on aligning that needs with opportunities. Because we really want to, what we hear from folks is that it takes a long time to get somewhere. It's hard to travel somewhere. And so people should be able to live in a neighborhood where they can get their daily needs served on a daily basis without having to hop in a car or wait for an hour-and-a-half bus line just to pick up some groceries for the day. We also were focusing on the support of communities of all types, especially coming out of COVID and in a different world. We're hearing a lot from our engagement around feelings of isolation in all age groups, feelings of not being connected to community, of not being a part of their community and having that day-to-day interaction, moving into a different sort of hybrid workplace, people being in different places and working in different ways, and the isolation that COVID gave us maybe, really left people feeling wanting more connection with the communities that they live within, with their communities and employees. And as we think about how we manage that growth, really valuing the environment, not just as a resource for extractive value, but for its value on its own, for the all the living beings that the natural systems support. In climate resilience, as I mentioned earlier, with a new direction from the legislature, we really focus this not just on like making those numbers work that are hard for folks to understand how many megatons of greenhouse gas emissions. I don't know what that means. I know it's not good for us, but really focusing more on, through an environmental justice lens, what strategies that we can employ that also provide benefit to communities who are already the most impacted by climate change, or the most burdened by the impacts that we see every day, whether that's extreme heat, wildfire smoke last year where we couldn't even be outdoors, but if you don't have air conditioning, then you don't have the ability to escape from wildfire smoke coming from Canada. So thinking about and focusing on strategies that actually center those who are most burdened by those impacts in the park.
Mr. Chip, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Are you doing any education or focus on, for example, deadly storms and the impacts of water, electricity, safety measures? Are you doing any of something in that area?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee member, that is a great question, and actually a lot of our local government partners lead those education efforts because they are in the emergency response sort of field. We have our own emergency response on how we deal with things like Metro Mobility and Metro Transit in those sort of situations and the services that we deliver. But on community education, we know that there's already a lot of coordination with local governments to do that work, and certainly where we can support, we're happy to do that.
Okay, so you're tapped into all of that?
Yes, sure, thank you. And then finally on the last two that we had a very strong focus in this cycle, especially on remedying discriminatory land use practices. While we've had national laws that have prohibited explicit discrimination, like the Fair Housing Act, and these were from the 60s, we do know that what was once explicit racism that we see in redlining has only become implicit. And it's harder to find, but it can be found, and it needs to be rectified. And there are other sorts of land use practices that fit into that as well. But these are the things that, the types of practices that don't allow us to achieve the goals that we have across this region. And then finally, the importance of the economic health of people in the region is so important. It's the connection for a lot of resource within the region and feeling that sense of safety and stability within your life, but also recognizing that we have economic inequities, and we're also in the middle of a transition to a green economy. And so similar to what I had said previously around those being most burdened by climate change, actually benefiting from the strategies that plays in here as well on economic well-being. So I'm gonna go really quickly because I've been talking a lot, but I want to move through to my colleagues here too. We've been taking feedback from local units of government because they are one of our primary implementers, so we look for them often to like help us make sure we're writing what we're saying clearly, but also hearing from the community on, are we reflecting back, and do you see yourselves in our plans? Did we get it right on what you shared with us already? And is this direction moving in the right direction? We've been working really closely with our other policy area teams too to really reinforce and advance that work together, and understanding that our strategies can be somewhat effective alone, but are better when we work together on developing those strategies to actually achieve those regional goals. So a lot of updates in here that are more housekeeping things, but it continues, and that's work that we will continue to do. We are continuing to engage. This slide was created a little while ago, so we're actually in the middle of this process right now with our summer engagement opportunities. Actually just had a regional planning advisory group meeting today with Metro Cities. to talk about land use policies, our work with the American Indian Advisory Council, which is comprised of leaders from across the American Indian community within the region. Continues, and they will be providing recommendations to the council in September on commitments that they think will represent their needs. And we continue engagement with rural communities. We have several work groups that continue, of council members that continue to inform this work, in addition to our kind of formal structures, our land use advisory committee and others. And of course, our ongoing cross-divisional team coordination. As we continue to work towards this public comment draft that the council will be releasing soon, we continue to review our language against these frameworks, and you'll hear more about the environmental justice framework and the community-centered frameworks today. In making sure that our strategies and policies and actions that we're thinking about are really reflecting what we've been hearing from community in this process, and that we aren't promising things that we can't deliver, but we are transparent about the work that we can do and making plans for figuring out the things that we're not sure how we can do yet. I will also say we talk about housing policy. We have a whole chapter of housing policy because part of our role at the council is to plan for the region's housing needs and to also provide an allocation, define that allocation of affordable housing need for local units of government that they need to plan for in their plans. We also touch housing on a number of operational ways. We operate the Metro Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and we serve over 7,000 families with rent assistance. And that's the program that continues to grow. As it's odd if you had asked me 5 years ago that if we would be receiving new rent assistance resources in this program, like, no, we haven't gotten anything. We're never going to have that. But we have received both from the federal government and now from the state, we'll be receiving and growing that program more vouchers that we can serve more families with. So when we're thinking about our housing policies, we're thinking both about the planning work as well as on our operational side, how we're able to serve families with the homes that they need in the communities that they need to support their own success as they defined it. This is just our schedule here. We're in that execution phase, that blue square where we're in that plan development. Our staff are working also with a housing work group and re-engaging with us, community organizations that and other residents that they've engaged with over that time to check back on, did we hear you right? Are we capturing this the correct way and our strategies moving in the right direction?
Mr. Chair, quick question. I'm going to assume that you're also including languages for non-English speakers in all of this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Council Member. Today, we don't have that, but that is certainly something I'll talk with our communications team about how we deliver that. And at what levels we do that. There are some things I think for sure we need to provide in other languages. Other things are technical for local units of governments we work with, so yeah.
And not all of that in writing, a lot of it is vocal, verbal.
Right, and I think Michelle actually might be able to speak to some more of that when she presents later today too.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
I have a question too. How do you plan to do community engagement work to ensure it's a reflection of the people's voice from the actual community? Such as, who are you going to find to lead these initiatives? For example, our streets just held an event in the Rondo community. But when I went, they paid people from the community to be there, but they weren't doing engagement. They were just paid to sit there. So like if they took pictures, imagery looks as if, oh, this is what the community wants. But realistically, they were not happy. They felt used and abused. And then they're asking the people, because I was there, and they're like, what would reparations look like to you? And I'm like, well, reparations would be the actual community members and Rondo descendants leading that, not you asking us what you should do to lead it. So just back to community engagement, like how is your plan going to be the actual community's voice and not hiring someone to take information and they kind of lead it from their own perspective and not the actual community?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, committee member, that was a really good question. We have actually worked through our process because we agree, I don't want to be transactional in our conversations. And there are a couple of different methods that we've used that are really trying to right size to a community's capacity or time commitment availability. There are a couple of, one process that we have built in is using a cohort model of engagement where we work with community-based organizations to then bring community members to the table. We started this with both a youth cohort where we're working with organizations that serve youth ages 14 to 24. And having those youth participate in this process. It was a series, sort of a 5-month series of conversations where part of those conversations was also for the youth to be going now and asking those questions of their peers of what do you need to see, what is your vision for this region, what do you need in this region, what is important to you. And then our supports at the council, what staff supports we're providing were to help those youth to share their own recommendations to the council. And council members might recall where we had those youth groups come to the council, present both at having a kind of open house, informal session, as well as formal recommendations to the council on where they thought that we should be focusing. As we're getting to this part of the process, we're coming back to like, did we get this right to those same groups? That was just one example. We also hosted, worked with community-based organizations or other groups to host community conversations where we had similar, where they're like, I don't know if I can do a 5-month commitment, but I can do a couple of conversations. And so we had those conversations where we're asking the same sorts of questions of what's important to you, what should we focus on, whether it was on important for the youth cohort, it was broad, anything that they wanted to talk about, we really followed their lead. We also had a land use cohort that we used, or that we had put together. And previously we had done some youth in participatory research, where youth were engaged in our parks and finding out what underrepresented youth who aren't represented in our park system, who don't engage the regional park system, no matter what barriers that were barriers to their participation in that work, in addition to their own experiences and sharing that with us as well. So a variety of different kind of longer relationships and shorter, trying to provide a variety of opportunities. And of course, like anytime anyone wants to share anything with us, we are happy to do that too. I won't pretend that we got it 100% right, but we're trying to move in that direction for where community wants us to move and making sure we're reflecting that in the process.
Committee member?
Yeah, sorry about that. So you're talking about vouchers, creating vouchers. So there's just like a lot on here, like housing at 60% AMI is still needed, supplying 30% AMI is great priority. I think that should be main priority. But having worked with vouchers before, some of them keeping people like in a very difficult position, some of them giving people $100 a month to live on, and making it impossible to get out. I'm just wondering how would you go about, because there's not much choice in housing choice vouchers. So I guess what kind of vouchers are you referring to, like developing, and how does that look?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair and committee member. We have federal vouchers that we receive that have very prescriptive guidelines around how we can use them and what the rules are around those programs. We have some discretion on those rules that we bring to the council each year for their consideration. New vouchers being made available in the coming year are actually coming from a state rent assistance program where there's much more flexibility around that. That voucher program development is underway right now, and it's work that our colleagues in in my Metro Housing Authority, as well as in other public housing agencies around the state, have been engaged in to make that process or to make those program guides as flexible as possible to really meet community needs, and also be continually able to be implemented. We need to have the staff resources to do that work too, and to provide the supports to families that need them to find those homes that are gonna meet their needs best.
And then in terms of just discrimination in housing, a lot of times it's impossible to use a voucher even if you have one. Is there any plan in place to be aiding in that effort or that area, because that's a major barrier to any sort of success with that program, I think. I'm sorry.
I can barely hear you on
Yeah.
here.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I was just saying, due to discrimination in housing and the fact that there are laws, but they're not really very enforceable unless someone explicitly says something. And you have proof of that, and again, having worked in this field and seeing how difficult it is sometimes just based on discrimination to get, even just to use a voucher. I was just wondering if there's anything in place for that, to try to actually aid people to ensure that they have rights, because if we're going towards anything that's, justice in any way, shape or form, then we have to put in the supports for this instead of just, what's been, just status quo, so. I was just wondering if there's any plans in place, whether that's, at the state or just, a task force or something, but I think that's really important, because otherwise it's really difficult to use them.
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, Council Member, or committee members, you're right that discrimination in taking vouchers is really difficult. We encounter that all the time when we're trying to support our families in finding housing. We don't just give them a voucher and say good luck. We actually do provide housing support assistance, housing search assistance, and in our Metro HRA, we had also initiated a community choice program to build in additional supports to help in that housing search process. That model was so successful that the federal government decided that they wanted to see, to test its success by creating a research program around that community choice model. So now we're one of those 20 selected sites who are testing individual supports to see how successful those are. We think they're already successful. But on the other side, on the landlord engagement side, in addition to supporting and engaging with landlords to try to build that landlord pool, the other thing that we know has been advanced at the legislature and our staff did testify in support of is removing that discrimination for a source of income as a part of law. Right now, it's not one of the things that is protected under the law, source of income. And it's certainly one of those elements that we've been advocating for at the council for years. I think we were this close this year to getting it. And at that last minute, as things happen in the legislature, it didn't end up in the final bill that was passed. But that's something that certainly is top of mind for us, absolutely.
Thank you.
Committee member.
Want to have a clarifying question. Is the council primarily focusing on rentals at this time? Or do you guys do owner occupied?
Mr. Chair, committee member, when we are doing our long-range planning work, it's for the entire landscape of housing. And not just rental, not just home ownership, but all of the other elements, cooperative housing, a variety of different approaches. And not just on ownership or rental, but also thinking about the different housing types we need to meet our different families' needs, different life cycle needs, certainly at different points. My in-laws just retired and they're like, we don't want a big house, and they still ended up in a big house because they couldn't find anything smaller where they wanted to live. So thinking about what we actually need at different points in our lives and ensuring that it's actually accessible for our different and varying mobility needs, because for all of us, those will all change at different points of our lives as well. That's a part of the entire housing landscape. So not a particular focus in one way or the other, but really recognizing how important that full spectrum is.
Okay. And then I know that this might be primarily a state thing, but is there any plans on looking at housing, supporting housing for interest adverse folks?
Mr. Chair, Council Member, committee member, we are aware of the need for different financing mechanisms that don't include interest on that, and we know that there are some community banks that have been supporting those. We know it's certainly something when we think about that access to home ownership opportunities too, that those types of partnerships for some of our funding programs that the council has, that those partnerships are the types of partnerships that kind of score better for us as well. But yeah, I definitely have heard that need, for sure.
I have two quick ones. One, along the same line of financing is that I think in our community years ago, I'm not how prevalent it is today, but there was a lot of contract for deeds. Because they couldn't get the loans, they couldn't, and so there was all, my dad had one, so I know, so that, and the second one to your question of communications, it was very interesting and very informational when the young people from Richfield came in.
Oh, right.
They were in high school age, their questions on housing is, one is that they have a bigger family, there's no 3-4 bedroom places being built.
Right.
And so, you know, they're looking at moving out of Richfield where they have all their friends, and what the impact that was on them and their families. And it was another issue they brought up, but it was all, you know, relevant to what the subject was, and also you can see that they were thinking it through. What is long term in housing? What is, you know, for their family?
Yeah, thank you. And I think one of the things that they also talked about in that, about not wanting to move, was that connection to community, which we had talked about a little bit earlier, just feeling that like, but this is where these are where my things are, this is where my friends are, my family members, or where my grocery store that I like to shop at that has all the things that I like to cook with, those things are right there. And moving elsewhere, not being able to find those housing opportunities within your community that you currently live is certainly one of the key parts of our housing work, is supporting local units of government and planning for communities that actually offer those opportunities across all of our life cycles. It's not just one type of housing within your community, but and also that range of affordability as well. I've talked a lot about, I think I've touched on a lot of these items already of engaging on focusing on resident perspectives, but particularly in housing around housing stability. And we've heard this both in our program work, through our voucher programs. We have one that's a partnership called Homework Starts with Home, that's really focused on supporting families who are experiencing housing instability so that their children can be successful in school. And we're hearing a lot from residents about just that housing instability, or just feeling like it's very tenuous to stay where you are today. And thinking about how we build in supports for that stability over time, which you can see sort of down that line here. When we think about opportunities, it's not just any opportunity, but quality opportunities, places that are safe for you to live, that meet your needs, that actually you can live within and move within, especially if you have mobility issues or other cognitive impairments that make it difficult, that our housing section meet the needs of everybody within our district.
Yes, ma'am.
One of your bullet points said, my question is, what does ensuring people can stay where they live look like? Because I live in Rondo and my property tax goes up $1,000 a year. Like, it's went up $3,000 in the last 3 years. So it's like, okay, I'm going to be pushed out by 2050. So what is your plan to ensure that people can stay?
Right. Thank you for the question. I think it's a really great question. I feel you on the property taxes front myself. That's always an eye opener. Like, oh, that's more. We don't get to affect the tax system, unfortunately, fortunately, for a variety of reasons. But really thinking about when we were doing long-range planning for growth and development, it is thinking about having and planning for all of those variety of housing needs within community, so that you don't have to move 3 towns over if you're looking for a smaller place when you retire, so that you can upgrade to a larger home if you start to grow a family, or so that you have options to live within your community that actually meet your needs. I totally hear you on taxes though, and I wish I could solve that problem.
I'm sorry. I just want to thank Chair, Councilmember, when you guys speak, before you make sure you just address your name so that, we can know who you are. So It's a fairly new committee, and I wanna make sure that everybody here understands who's speaking at the time they're speaking. Thank you, Chair and Co-Chair, and community members, speakers.
Thank you.
So we'll oh, go ahead.
So, yeah, Mitchell Hanson, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just along those lines, I think, we know that, displacement and gentrification happens the moment you announce something. So I think in terms of ensuring where people can stay, I mean, there's a shocking amount of people in North Minneapolis and parts of Minneapolis, at least I know, and I'm recently looking into other cities as well, that you don't really notice unless you go into actually like recording history of properties, but the amount of homes that have been bought or sold is like absolutely unbelievable. And that's already happened before with the light rail in different areas. So I think just when I'm just along the same lines, like ensuring people can stay where they live, a lot of people are already gone. And I guess, yeah, when you see the community connection, I'm seeing a lot of, I mean, in Harrison, other places, like a lot of people are already gone. So like, it's not a question to be answered, I think answerable right now, is a massive issue, but like how do you address that, like with long range planning, where it's like, okay, we already know that the moment this is announced, market rate housing is gonna go in, things are gonna change, like what's gonna be different in the future to make sure that that doesn't happen, or people in Rondo aren't paying $2,000 more, next year.
Yeah, thank you for that question and anti-displacement. And we have an anti-displacement framework. It's not on your calendar for today, and maybe that's something that we can have our teams come back and talk with you about too. I don't wanna make light of it. It is really important, but I think it'd be best to have our team here to talk about that.
Thank you.
So maybe I can coordinate with staff on that work.
Thank you.
I'm gonna turn it to Lisa for more comments.
Thank you. Again, I'm Lisa Thompson, General Manager for Environmental Services. And just to set the table, think clean water for future generations. Water's pretty plentiful in Minnesota. Sometimes we have too much of it, so we need to know what we're gonna do when we have high water. And sometimes we worry about what if we don't have enough? Or what if it gets contaminated, then what? So our organization, as we became part of the council, we weren't always part of the council. So our original was to treat wastewater, and that was our focus. And then we became part of the Met Council, which is a really good thing, because as you can tell, being a place to live, work, play, thrive, you can't do it without water. So our intent is to make sure that as a regional planning partner with the rest of our divisions at council, that we bring all these different governing bodies. There's a lot of governing bodies when you talk about water. Most communities have their own water supply. At the state level, there's DNR, there's Board of Water and Soil Resources, Department of Health, Pollution Control. So I'm not gonna name them all, but a lot of silos, right? So the council is very much about trying to knit all these parties together, whether it's housing or transportation. But in particular, when it comes to water, we have to collaborate. We have to understand and share perspectives if we're going to prevent the future crisis when it comes to water. What do we have to do today to make sure we're still gonna have the water we cherish today, tomorrow? And so a lot of what my part of this organization has been focusing on is developing the ability to collaborate and bring other stakeholders together to learn from each other and understand what we're starting to see separately, but when we put it together, we see something even more informative than through our separate lenses. So that collaboration is key to not only how we're working on our water policy, but how we think the solutions and the problems can be addressed, so we create a sound system of all these different governing units in terms of going together, forward together. Doesn't mean we're gonna have one superstructure, we're gonna have a lot of structure working together, and that's the key piece, is to figure out how to have that engagement and that collaboration to happen. And that's where we've been focusing a lot of our efforts. So water policy plan, just a little bit of background. Of course, the last time it was updated was 2015. It's being updated along with the regional development guide and all the other policy plans you've been hearing about. Our goal overall is to have, ensure sustainable water resources for this region. We'll have policies that include water responsibility for wastewater and water supply planning, water resources planning, management, and wastewater system plan. It contains the overall water sustainability goal for the council and then policies and implementation strategies for the various policy and planning areas. So I left the slides in from the May plan, because we all know we had some wonderful weather that day. Water was our issue, right? Of a different sort. I thought it would be helpful for you to see what was the status of things in May. And now tonight, I will tell you where we're at. A lot of progress is being made because we want to give enough time for the public review of the policy. So since May, we've actually gotten the water supply plan approved to take to the council. And that was as of last Wednesday. There was a meeting with the Metropolitan Area Water Supply Advisory Council, and there's a technical advisory council. So a bunch of folks that are charged with making sure, and that brings some of those silos that I talked about earlier to the table for the discussion, so we can make sure that they feel that what we're bringing forward looks like a good start, and then we take it out for public process. Next Tuesday, the Environment Committee, which is part of our Met Council, is going to be asked to move our water policy plan forward for public process initiation. So we're ready to go on the public process. But this comes on the heels of a lot of meetings that we've held with all those different stakeholders to get their engagement and their input to what we've drafted. There's 4 main objectives in this policy plan, and since this was created, we've updated those. So the first one is climate, and our new language for climate, again, what we're trying to create is actionable. Now, sometimes you can get a real policy sounding and it's hard to relate and think about, well, what would you actually do to get that? So for climate, we have the region's waters and water services are protected from and made resilient to the ongoing and future effects of climate change. Shorter than what we have there and a little bit more succinct in terms of what we would be focusing on. The second area is investments, and for that one, our new language is water protection, planning, management, and infrastructure investments are optimized to ensure public and ecosystem health are fully protected now and in future generations. And then on the health, our new language is natural waters, source waters, water services, and infrastructure are managed, restored, and enhanced to protect public and ecosystem health that ensures a high quality of life in the region. And lastly, on equity, the benefits of clean and abundant water and water services are defined by local needs and environmental context, accessible and justly shared by all residents and communities. One area where I think, in comparison to a lot of places across the country, we are much better off than a lot of places, and we intend to keep it that way. And paying attention to aging infrastructure and things of that sort are really important, or we could lose that quickly.
Brittany Clausen, regarding the topic around equity, I'm curious if you foresee shifts or changes in our political climate as to personal beliefs around equity, and if this is like, once it's permanently finalized with the process that you have, is that kind of finalized? I guess is what I'm asking.
Will it change?
Yeah, is that, I just wanna make sure that this is like not up for debate when we put something out there that is obviously the right thing to do.
Mr. Chair, Co-Chair, if I may, and certainly my colleagues please chime in equity work, I think we have been evolving in our regional plans for some time. Thrive had a large discussion around disparities in the region and equity as an outcome. And it wasn't well received by a lot of our partners, but it was something that the council persisted in continuing to move forward and implement, even if some of our partners didn't like it. I will let our council members speak to what they think about equity in our current plans today, but I will say from the staff perspective that we feel the direction from our council members is to continue to advance equitable outcomes in our work, and equitable processes is a part of that. I will just say that our past practice, or our past experiences around equity, where the council has said, no, it's still important to us, even if you don't agree. But I'll let council members speak to that.
Thank you. Actually, I'm not on the environmental committee, but we've had the presentation, and just the importance of it is one of the reasons the water organization is combined with us today. And I would tell you that this is not standalone or the first time that it's been read. And even some of the history is, this is my second tour as a council member. I was a Governor Perpich appointment 30 years ago. And we had a discussion then, because our focus really was on wastewater and how we can grow the community. But so it was a different focus, but water's always been at kind of the heart of what Met Council's doing. You wouldn't set up your own sewer system in Minneapolis and have a different one in St. Paul. Having a regional plan around this and how we operate is really important, and we take it very seriously. And you've all listened to what happened in Flint, Michigan, and when things kind of just get out of sight, out of mind, and you turn it on and it works, is all the concern. And so I think that, speaking on behalf of the council, we have a whole environmental committee doing a lot of work on this. But it'll be with our report that you get to a point where you're discussing individual sentences about how this commitment works and who does it impact, and it's great work and it's interesting to watch. But I rest assured, I think again the council members that we have now in particular are really focused on this, and we get pieces of this continually, and we can always come back here with any question you have as we go through this. That's true of the subjects you hear today. There's a lot of materials. You can get these electronically, and then something clicks, let us know, and we can come back here and say, committee member Lenine had sent this question in, here's what our responses. Excuse me.
Mercedes, I was just wondering if there's any funding that goes towards water education towards the youth, because they're our future. So if we're investing in educating them, that can make our future better by them just knowing the importance, because culturally water is very spiritual, but it's also healing. Like in the native culture, you can heal water through singing and talking to it and being with it in a positive way. And so I think if kids learn that, then there's a way that we can heal our water. But if they're not being taught that, then we're going to just continue the cycle that is currently going in.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, council member, for that comment and observation. We have been sponsoring some children's educational events. Children's Water Festival is one that we're a primary sponsor of. But actually, we see that one of the draft topics that we're going to talk about listed on this is workforce. And a key part of that will be educating up and coming potential workers about the work that we have in our organization and helping them prepare for that work. So I think that we might be seeing additional efforts for education and training as a result of this next version that we're going to adopt here next year.
And could I add to that too? In our regional park The council doesn't own or operate our regional park system, that's owned and operated by 10 of the implementing agencies, and they do the programming, but the council provides a lot of supports and direction and coordination for that work, including funding for programs. And education, our council members made this a point for us too earlier in this process around the importance and opportunity for education within the regional park system, around things like water, around climate, around natural systems, and really advancing those goals. And we've been talking about that work with our implementing agencies as well, about how we help support that within their programming efforts, because there's a lot of great opportunity there.
Felicity Moses. My question is do the water plans focus primarily on our ability to drink, treat, keep clean water, or do they also include opportunities for recreation, healing, access to being near water? Where are the boundaries of our water planning?
So for environmental services, we are a service provider and then a planning role. So in terms of our facilities, we're treating the water to bring it back to the environment for, could be reuse in the environment. We're looking at the potential for recharging groundwater more directly in the future. We're already doing that in one of our facilities. When it gets to recreation, we provide environmentally safe treated wastewater back to the environment. And so Mississippi River is a good example of our largest plant was the first plant on the Mississippi River and took us from a river between here and Red Wing, where there was only 3 fish that could be found through a survey, to there's a lot of trophy fish and great opportunity out there today. In terms of, I don't know if you want to add anything on the park side, but
We'll just repeat the same. There's a lot of collaboration between Lisa's team and mine around that water quality aspect, especially because so many of our regional parks are around water bodies along the Mississippi, have lakes within them, and so a lot of collaboration around safe, even just fish advisories we were talking about recently for certain areas. And but yeah, it's a key part of our regional system.
and in the future, there might be some innovations that add, in some different ways, those values. And in terms of education, one more thought, come to the Minnesota State Fair. We're gonna be in the eco exhibit this year with features on our services from a wastewater perspective. So if your kids like ick factor, it's a good one to come visit.
I went with my son on a field trip to the state fair and the water exhibit. It was pretty cool.
It's gonna be cool this year. There's well, if I can take a moment here. We're gonna have a actual statue that represents a year's worth of a human's poop. So if you have kids that will, get turned on by that, then we've got their interest, and then we can teach them some other important things about water, right? Like, draw them in. All right, so these are the topic areas that we heard the most about from the different listening sessions that we had with communities that we went out with already and shared what we were looking at. I think all these areas plus the 4 objective areas, they're not gonna go away. I think if anything, it's gonna be a yes and kind of thing. Because what we're finding is the more voices we bring to the discussion in a safe way, the more ahas people are having, and they're like, yeah, and could we do this too, or can we add that to it, or make a connection? So that's the exciting part of getting more voices and creating that opportunity for collaboration to begin. And so this is, looking at the time, sorry, I gotta get Charles some time here. These were the takeaways we were already hearing as of May. And last week when we did got the approval to take forward the water supply plan, we have folks saying, wow, this is such a much better way for us to try and get our work done together. And the interest and what I've read once that I really truly believe now is the informal networks, the trust that comes from that informal networking sometimes is the real stuff that gets things done. And that's what we're seeing as we talk about water, because everybody cares about water and understands how important it is. So it's a uniting, not a dividing thing for us. So I won't cover this because we've already done those things.
Brittany Clausen, I don't know how to word this question, but given that it seems that we're on the treatable side of things, on the preventable side, I know that you have your collaborative partners. Are any of those partners companies or institutions that may have to alter their policies or how they're producing products or services that we engage in that pollutes our water? Or do we have kind of like any educational aspect or collaboration amongst, if, I don't know what that looks like, but I'm curious if you could answer that?
So one way in which we prevent pollution is to regulate the industries that send us their waste. And we are charged with that responsibility through the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And it's a combination of some things are not possible to be removed by our process, or it would be very costly to do that. So it's better to prevent it from coming in, and so we can prevent industries from using certain types of chemicals.
Okay.
So that's a role that we have as a service provider and a regulator with that. We need to have the established limits or what's not good for the environment in order to base that off of. So there's governing pieces for us to follow, but we exercise that within the pollution prevention side of the world.
Thank you. I promise then it will be Charles. But first, the pretty system. I think our regional parks and trails system is the most beautiful one in the region. And I think our residents agree, and we hear this pretty regularly in all of our conversations and engagement, just how important access to green space, whether it's within our formal regional park system, a local park, or even a yard, how important that is to people's everyday lives, or even just being able to see crossing that river every day. I think about as part of my daily commute, just how important that is to me, and how exciting it is whenever I get to see a bald eagle fly overhead. Like, this is what it's part of my day. That's awesome. I will talk really quickly about our engagement, but I want to just stress that the engagement around regional parks didn't start with this planning process. It also starts, there are a number of regular work that our parks group does on a regular basis through our visitor study, where we're engaging with visitors to the regional park system every 5 years to ask them, like, what are you doing? Why did you come here? Not in that sort of prying kind of way, but why is this important to you? What else would make this better? Would you come back again? Is this your first time? And lots of bigger work in that. So we're using previous engagement work that we've most recently completed, the youth participatory research work that I talked about barriers to youth accessing parks, regional parks in particular, as well as a number of our regular committees and technical working groups that we stood up with our regional parks implementing agencies. Our key themes in this process really mirror what you heard me talk about earlier around our regional parks. It is a system that is well loved, and that was really evident even more so during COVID, where we saw use really jump through the roof. And folks asking for more. We need more space for social distancing, but even more people being there at that time. And so as we're thinking about continuing to not just maintain the system we're also growing that system, not just in the park space, but also our regional trails for connecting our park system across the region. Our focus in this cycle has been really on building better supports for natural system restoration, especially in an urban environment where we see degradation happen, or we're in a restoration practice where acquisition is coming from agricultural land or former industrial land, especially along riverfronts or in areas that that might provide better opportunities for access close to home for all of our neighbors around the region. A lot of focus on climate resilience in this cycle not just recognizing the role that the ecosystem itself plays in helping to mitigate the impacts of climate change, being that place for stormwater runoff, for groundwater recharge, for cooling effects that regional parks can have, for the ability to have refuge from hot days and jump in that lake. There are so many things that our parks can do, and they're also impacted by climate change. And the pests that we start to see, the trees, things like emerald ash borer that are impacting our canopy also are impacting our parks, the natural systems within our parks as well. So our focus has really been there, in addition to some housekeeping things that are really for our agencies around how we review their plans and trying to operationalize those things in a much simpler way and keep our policy plan at the policy level and our operations in a different way. So some housekeeping changes that we're making in this cycle. But one thing I wanted to highlight in particular was around this definition around recreation, facilities, and programming that really was born out of a history of a very Eurocentric approach to recreation that assumes that folks want to recreate in the regional park system for solitude purposes and only recreate in activities that are really primarily driven by that Eurocentric approach through things like hiking, bird watching, horseback riding, things I like to do too, but aren't the focus of how my family goes to parks either. So as we were engaging with residents most recently in visitor study, visitors to that, not just residents, we get visitors from around the state and from across the nation to our regional system. We're asking them, what sort of recreation do you think is important for you? What do you come here to do? And a lot of you said, well, do nothing, just hang out essentially. But a lot of folks were also asking for, I come with my family. There aren't spaces for us to sit in the shade together. It's, set up for 1 or 2 people together, not for 5 or 10 people together or larger groups. So we've really took a lot of that to heart in thinking about how we broaden what is considered supportable within the regional park system that creates those spaces for all of our residents in this region to feel welcome, that space is for them too. Even if they don't like horseback riding, if they don't like fishing, but there are also not just for opportunities for participating in activities that they'd like to do, but opportunities to learn about other activities, access equipment that they might not have access to on a year-round basis. We have been in this process really focused especially around the importance of how the regional park system holds sacred spaces for the American Indian communities in this region, and how we are working with them and our partners in creating respectful places that recognize that not all parts of our regional park system are suitable for recreation, but should be set aside for respect and honor of sacred spaces for communities across this region that were here long before we were all here. That has been a major focus that will continue past the adoption of this plan, because it's new and we don't want to rush to an answer, but want to work to get it right in partnership with Native American communities across the region. But it is a very large focus of our work going forward. And continued coordination, recognizing that our regional trail network goes hand in hand with our transportation network that Charles could speak more about, and that we continue to do engagement and refinement of this work going forward.
Anybody have a question?
Yeah, Committee Member Zachary. I had 2 questions. First is regarding the tree canopy. I know in the city of Minneapolis, there's a lot of federal funding that came in to increase that. What is Metropolitan Council doing to do more of that work outside of Minneapolis? And then I'll say the same question for you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's very timely. I actually was just talking about tree canopy this morning with my team members. We just received from this legislative session allocation of funding, I'm gonna get the numbers wrong, about $1.5 million for tree canopy in the regional park system. So we'll work with our implementing agencies to distribute that for work they're already doing to maintain canopy within the regional parks and trails. And then the legislature also allocated a little less than $2 million and directed the council to establish a community forestry program for grants to local units of government to support tree canopy in their work. And the specific focus was around there's a a social demographic index that the federal government has defined. It's essentially, I would shorthand as environmental justice communities. It's very specific. I don't know why the legislature chose that one, but that's the one they chose. But it really focuses on ensuring that canopy and communities who are low income, who experience other air quality impacts and there's a variety of social indices as part of that. It's not green zones, it's across the entire region, but similar in that, again, that's what the legislature wrote for us, but the intent is a similar intent, and the focus is meant to be there. So that's some work that we are actually just in the process of building that and establishing. That would be a brand new program for the council with new funding for us.
And then question 2 is, you spoke a lot about access. What is the work of Metropolitan Council to provide more access for BIPOC communities, especially like getting back to that abundance, word that we spoke about earlier? How are we creating opportunities for abundance living, planning, all that?
That's a great question. So when we think about access, we know it's not just proximity. Proximity is important. Certainly make it easier because it shouldn't be so far from you, but also recognizing that some of what I was talking about before about those spaces feeling welcoming, and having those opportunities that you want to engage in as a part of that work too. It's part of the reason that it is one of the large reasons that we had done that barrier study with the youth participatory research was to identify what are youth seeing as barriers to why they wouldn't go to a park, even if it is in their backyard or within easy biking distance for them. They identified a lot of, some of those were around the recreational opportunities. I noticed some of them are just in what the park rules say around what's in the way certain under state law, certain park ordinance offenses are criminalized rather than just guided as behavior correct. You're like, oh, you're on the wrong path, go over there. So there's a lot of different pieces that we know that feed into what it means to be accessible. And we want to recognize that it's not just proximity.
We're gonna have to try to hold some questions till a little bit after, because we're gonna be running out of time on Charles, and we have another presentation to make here as well. So, but if it's important, go ahead, but right now, if we can kind of move it along, it'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members, for having us tonight and reviewing these projects. As a reminder, my name is Charles Carlson. I serve as Executive Director for Transportation Services here at the Council. Within the council, we have 2 transportation divisions. One division is Metro Transit. They operate most of the transit system. MTS is the other transit division. We operate some of the transit system, including the Metro Mobility System and some other services. Tonight's focus is not on those transportation programs, but really on transportation policies and planning that go into the regional development guide. So eager to connect with this group on those in the future, but obviously, especially with our shortened time, we'll give a quick overview of some of the policy pieces. In MTS, we are responsible for serving the region in transportation planning, and that is across modes and across jurisdictions. So while the council, apart from the transit system, does not own most of the transportation in the region, those are owned by cities and counties and the state and private operators of railroads and aviation and all of those things. The council does have a coordinating role in pulling these pieces together and advancing the livability of the region by having a high quality transportation system. So our plan really guides that work, and the way that we do that is by partnering with the groups that lead those efforts and own those systems. One of them is in the center, kind of the center to right of the screen, the Transportation Advisory Board. This is a group that's created in statute. There's 34 members on TAB. The council has 1 seat and 1 vote. TAB advises the council on transportation matters. Within that, there are subcommittees of TAB. There's a technical subcommittee that's a lot of the engineers and planners and folks in those roles, but also working groups that are more modally focused, whether that's bike ped or transit, or in the case of our advisory inputs over the last couple of years, a group focused on this transportation policy plan that we've developed. These efforts fed into a advisory work group that included council members, TAB members, and others. that then advised the Transportation Committee and the council on the policies and other matters in the transportation plan. To feed that, really, we had to conduct very robust engagement. And so we evaluated the transportation system. We did a number of different studies that looked at, both actual trips taken as well as trips not taken, and why weren't trips taken, and what were the barriers that folks experienced in transportation. What were the challenges that are met. We also held a number of different listening sessions, and the presentation has clickable links that we won't go into tonight, but you can learn more about them. These really informed the objectives and policies and actions that we bring forth to the region in the transportation policy plan. We looked at funding and what are the funding. There's significant funding change that happened last year with the state legislature. And then had dozens of meetings with work groups, fielded thousands of comments from our technical partners on the plan, and now are very excited to bring it forward to the public and to this group for engagement with it before it's adopted next year. So the plan really has two pieces. One is investment direction, so shaping the systems that the council for the most part does not own but does help coordinate. So setting forth priorities and direction for our partners as they engage with this work. The other is supporting documents. So there is a work program. There are a whole bunch of federal really this plan is required by federal law. And so this work that we engaged with is not just meeting the state requirements that Lisa talked about earlier, but also federal requirements that the region have as a large metropolitan area, a coordinated transportation plan for the region. Within this, we have a number of different of items. One is really there's hundreds of pages in all of these plans put together. I promise you do not want to read all of them. I welcome you to, but you won't want to. There is about a 70-page summary that includes really the plan context, how goals and policies relate in the plan, and then a snippet of investments that are upcoming in the region that could be a springboard to dive into more detail within other plans. But if you read one thing, it should be this piece. I will briefly mention transportation objectives. We only have 3 of the goals, but I'm going to actually read, because I have it with me, the 2 related to the goals that aren't listed here. These regional goals, there's 3 of them here. We've covered the other 2. Objectives are the end state. What does it mean if we're pursuing this goal for transportation? And the objectives are transportation specific. Each goal, each work area has kind of objective specific. For us, it's what are the end state? What is that completed? When this is done, what does it look like? For 3 of the goals, they're here. For the other 2 goals, I'll read them because they're quick. So the goal: our region is equitable and inclusive. Historically disadvantaged communities are better connected to jobs, education, and other opportunities. We repair and eliminate disparate and unjust impacts and harms to Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color. We better meet the transportation needs of people who have disabilities or limited mobility. And then for the goal of our communities are healthy and safe. And really these 2 goals are the ones that elevated from our engagement work as the 2 big things: equity and safety. So our communities are healthy and safe. People do not die or face life-changing injuries when using any form of transportation. People feel safer, more comfortable, and more welcome when using any form of transportation. We mitigate and avoid harm to people caused by nearby transportation infrastructure and use, for example, air quality, noise, and light. People are better connected to community and cultural resources that support their physical, emotional, and mental well-being. Finally, people can increase physical activity with more opportunities to walk, roll, or bike. So, committee members, these are the things we're focused on in transportation. We're excited to bring the plan forward, and really glad to begin to share this work with you tonight.
Thank
I
you
won't
very-
go over, I'm
One
sorry.
quick question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just going based off what you just said with transportation, like my community is being affected, like right now. Our history is being used to reharm us in Rondo. So as we're getting new roads and street names back, as like a reparations thing, we're actually paying for it, which is rising our property taxes and it's pushing people out and making it unaffordable for them to even stay there. So I just want that to be on your mind when you guys are planning things, like how, be intentional to protect the people there while you're using their history, because while you're using their history, you're increasing the value of our area, which is harming us. So it's not really giving any type of reparations or honoring while we're suffering. But the question I have is, these plans are for 2050, which is 25 years from now. Are any of these plans thinking futuristically, such as solar panel trails, roads, etc.? Right now, a bill was just passed for electronic bikes, and I think about other countries such as China and Japan, who are way more technical advanced when it comes to infrastructures and land developments. And all of the things I've seen just look like it's just making new roads or creating bike lanes, and it's not necessarily keeping up worldwide with like what's happening in other places in the world, which is more technical advanced. So we're actually like 5 years behind when it comes to technology or just other ways of infrastructure. Like you can study in China and Japan, even when it comes to water, like they're harvesting and using the environment, they're like building amazing buildings, but have like green land, so it's a healthy environment, and solar panels. But I've yet to see anything that is futuristic that is going to keep up with what's going on everywhere else around the world.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. Certainly great input. We do work closely with MnDOT and the city of St. Paul in some of the efforts in the Rondo area. Those efforts continue. They're certainly imperfect, and the great news is that I think the interest in doing better is one of the enduring pieces in this, and working together to get there is what remains underway. Relative to the some of the other elements of the plan, it's a 2050 plan, but one thing that we often want to emphasize is that it influences what we do tomorrow. And it influences the innovation and the investments and the decisions we make, including through a regional solicitation process where we administer allocation of about $250 million of federal funds every other year. That the work to build that 2050 vision is a daily occurrence. And so, I think having room not just for what we have now, but what's possible, and then the work every day of how we get there is a big feature. It's certainly not unique to transportation, but it's one that we think about. So thank you.
Anita Arena Davis. I do a lot of work with Minneapolis police and community members. And some of the things that we've been hearing most recently in the beginning of the summer is safety. And we had a woman whose son was murdered, and so we were helping her get some feedback on and capturing those people and getting that information for herself. We have in South Minneapolis, the Native community are concerned about the stations and a lot of the homeless and the drug use and violence that's surrounding those stations for the light rail, and safety, personal safety, not just on the light rails but on the buses. And so those are some things. I don't know if we need to talk with the police, the transit police, but how are you involved in that? If you could just.
Yep, Mr. Chair, committee member, probably a best a conversation with Metro Transit for the transit specific aspects. We do in our plan, we have a major goal around safety and identify policies and strategies that advance that. A big part of that is advancing Metro Transit Safety and Security Action Plan. So that may be a good topic for a committee in the future. Certainly not one that we can dig into any depth in the time we have tonight.
Here we have a couple more questions here.
Yep, just real quick, I'm just going off of the previous point that you made there. Do you, around transportation, do you have like a research and development team, or do you have any solicitation for innovative partners to support the green initiatives with transportation? Because oftentimes in-house, we can only do so much or think so deeply of that creative brain to get to where she mentioned previously, so I'm curious if you have that.
Great question, Chair and committee member. We do have, we have a number of different teams. There is a multimodal planning team. There's one that's more on the roadway and highway side, and a research team that both does transportation research for everyone in the region, but also is, kind of on the forefront of what are the trends, what are the big things that are happening. They've really been involved in significant change in transportation post-pandemic. It's really accelerated a lot of change that was already occurring, but really has been a way to understand how travel patterns have changed so that we can design our transportation systems around the new needs that people have, because they're different for a lot of folks than they were even 4 years ago, which in the scale of transportation systems is a massive amount of change in a short period of time.
Committee member, we have one more question and then we'll start with the next one.
Thank you for the recognition. You mentioned that there's goals around safety while using transportation or transit, and that there were goals around air quality and those sorts of things for the communities through which the transit is moving. I wanted to encourage the addition of safety to the communities that are, the transportation is moving through. For example, in North Minneapolis, there is a rail line that several young people have been hit by trains or had limbs, taken off, those sorts of things. And so as we are doing things like putting light rails down Broadway, and as we are using some of those train tracks, being cognizant that there are communities that are already there, and if there are additional safety, mechanisms that we can put in place along with that plan. And then more along the question line, you mentioned that the Met Council distributes millions of federal dollars, and I wonder how communities of color are being supported in receiving or participating with those funds, and moving beyond being tokenized, such that contractors are not receiving preference because they hire a few people of color, but rather businesses that are owned by individuals of color being supported in knowing about and accessing those resources.
Yeah. A great question, Mr. Chair, committee member. Certainly something that we could spend, there's a lot of work and a lot of really strong knowledge we have within the council. It's an important topic as we're pursuing transportation. Our partners have similar goals as well and similar programs that they've set up. Excellent topic for a future conversation, but agreed that the wealth building and business participation is a major focus and something that I think another night we could probably spend a lot more time on.
All right, we're moving to.
I'll just keep it brief. I'm not gonna review this slide with you, but I just suffice it to say it's a lot of official committee work that gets us to our public comment period. That's our official period. That doesn't mean that we'll stop talking about this work and make you go through official channels. As we talked about today, there are a number of topics that we've identified today already, which I'll go to the next slide, that sound like what might be good for a future deeper dive on those conversations. And certainly if there are other things as you're digging into drafts that we'll be making available here soon, that you want to dig into further or reach out to one of us or our team members to talk about, where we would welcome that absolutely anytime. And so I want to close there. We've had a lot of great comments today, unless there's anything else that folks would like to say before we.
Well, I'll add a few things. One is that as we talked about water and wastewater in particular, you can take a tour of these facilities, and we encourage you to do that, or ride along with the police chief or with one of the officers. And there's people look for interaction in this organization, and so if there's something you want me to facilitate, I can do it. Others, and actually I appreciate the presentation and the folks that are presenting. these are the higher level folks in the organization. If they can't answer it, I don't know who can. And again, we work under the, what is the title here? The Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity, which Si's the director there. So you have the folks that can get the answer for you if you don't, if I can't do it, or if Councilmember Carter can't do it, we can certainly help facilitate it. But in these visits to any of the facilities that we have and some other greater knowledge you get outside a month, we meet on a monthly basis, and sometimes you kind of lose track. If you miss one meeting, it's kind of down there, and so I encourage you to go to our website and checks out. All of these are filed and recorded, so you can go back. You'll be getting the minutes, and there's another suggestion here. I found it. I think it was it. So, thank you for the presentation here. This is great. I learn a lot every time I come to these meetings. If minimally, I learn 3 different acronyms every week.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One
Councilmember
comment.
Carter.
much.
Just one comment. There's some concern about safety in the transportation system. Maybe you wanna have Captain Morales come in, and he'd be happy to come in and give a presentation, particularly to this group.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. Excuse me, yes.
The chair asked that we hold comments during the parks portion. And so I did have a question going back there. You mentioned that there's all these things that are being done to make these spaces more welcoming for communities of color. I wonder how we're going about advertising or sharing that those changes are being made, so that people don't, we've done all these wonderful things and nobody knows, so then they still don't come, kind of a thing.
Thank you, that's a really great question, and actually is part of that coordination with the agencies. One of the things that we do is to coordinate and set that table with our agencies to share what they're doing so they can learn from one another. But you're right, getting out to the residents who they're meant to serve is a big part of that. I know a lot of that work is done in partnership. It's kind of in this recovery mode post-COVID to help invite people back to parks too. But especially those partnerships with schools and making that part of a regular classroom experience like we had pre-COVID. That's a lot of work that's happening right now. We know that children are often the best ambassadors for their families for getting out into nature. I come from a natural resource planning background, so that's a big part of building that, is that informal advertising is usually the best part of that. But there are also, I know, a lot of work where implementing agencies are working through community partners and advertising opportunities through direct mailing as well as through community newspapers, radio channels, and the thing to help make folks aware of them, and trying to do that in different languages too, and making sure we're hitting target audiences. But certainly I can share that with, I know it's a big part of like how to get people to continue to come and have those spaces. These are new offerings and opportunities for us.
Okay, we have 2 presentations to make, and maybe my fault for time management. But at this point, can we hear the folks with the environmental justice framework? Gonna hold it for 1 second. There you go. All right, I think we have it organized, and so. Okay, sorry about that, I had to get it in order here.
No worries. Can everyone hear me? Yes. All right. Good evening, Chair, Co-Chair, EAC committee members.
Today we are presenting the Draft Environmental Justice, or EJ, framework. My name is Sarah Gong. I am a co-lead of the Environmental Justice Task Force with my co-lead Angela Torres in the audience here. I'll let Laura introduce herself.
And good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Laura Brethheim. I'm a project coordinator for sustainability with Metro Transit, and I am one of the members of the EJ task force that works closely with Sarah and Angela.
So the Environmental Justice Task Force is a multidisciplinary team with members from each division and policy area supported, represented, and communicated with across the council. Tori Hampton is also a valued member of the EJ Task Force, and I want to extend a huge thank you to the team members who serve on the EJ Task Force. So this is our definition for environmental justice. It has been endorsed by council members. Environmental justice is the right for all residents to live in a clean, safe environment that contributes to a healthy quality of life. And we also have some supporting context of the council's EJ definition that I'd like to share with you all today. So EJ centers, but is not limited to Black communities, Indigenous communities, low-income communities, communities who have been displaced, live in redlined or formerly identified racial covenants, and communities who have and continue to experience a legacy of racism or other structural or systemic barriers that have resulted in environmental injustices, harms, and risks. Through its regional values, the council commits to conducting community-centered engagement, repairing past and ongoing harms, distributing benefits equitably, and preventing future burdens. And environmental justice at the council requires necessary adaptations to council services, requirements, policies, practices, processes, and decisions, starting with its regional development guide to support a healthy and safe region. We want to be very explicit and clear that the concept of environmental justice is centered and created in grassroots values. We are not discounting the work and the triumph that Black communities, Indigenous communities, communities of color, low-income communities, and other overburdened communities have done. We are instead uplifting and applying the work and principles in a regional government context. Our work has always been centered in the 17 principles of environmental justice. Each member of EJ Task Force is very familiar with these principles, and we have carried them throughout our work in its entirety. We understand that true justice means acknowledging harm that has arose from the actions or lack thereof from government agencies. It is important to the EJ Task Force that we work with overburdened communities to co-create solutions to rectify said harms in ways that are appropriate to the communities who experience them, so that the future is better for all of us. The EJ Task Force would also like to clarify what the purpose of an environmental justice framework is. An environmental justice framework helps us take a holistic approach to embedding EJ into policies and practices all throughout the process, because we believe that, an outcome is only as equitable and just as its process. An environmental justice framework is an approach to embedding EJ into the council's policy and planning processes. It is a set of assessment tools and approaches to mitigate unjust decisions and conditions and to maximize environmental benefits, not only for the present, but for the future. It is a method for uncovering council actions that contribute to disparate exposure and unequal protection from environmental hazards. And it is taking civil rights and subsequent laws further in a government context. The work that the EJ Task Force conducts is built upon existing work since 2021. There is an environmental justice commitment established in a council-adopted plan, and the EJ Task Force is helping to create the EJ framework that guides that commitment. We are a subgroup of the Equity Task Force. Equity and EJ are very interconnected. The three components of the equity framework that Lisa reviewed tonight are also overarching principles of environmental justice. EJ frames these principles in the context of people and their relationship to their environment, including land, air, soil, water, plants, and animals. The EJ framework provides guidance on how to integrate EJ principles into practices and policies set by the RDG. And so to create the EJ framework, the EJ task force reviewed existing EJ frameworks and EJ-related materials from local EJ-focused organizations such as Wakan Tipi Awanyan Kapi, partner agencies such as the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the state of Minnesota, and similar agencies and metropolitan planning organizations across the country. We also looked at the 2050 Regional Development Guide engagement data for data related to environmental justice so that our EJ framework would reflect community voices as well. We currently have a contract with the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs, and so we hosted an environmental justice workshop. We had a lot of expansive, ambitious ideas of what EJ at the council and in our roles means. And then we synthesized our lengthy discussion and to adapt to fit within the regional development guide. And so the EJ task force distilled the synthesis into the draft framework we are presenting today. Before we get into the framework, I'd like to go over conditions for success that we have identified. Again, we want to emphasize that environmental justice is not only an outcome, but it's a process as well. In order for this work to be fully realized, the council must fulfill these conditions of success to successfully apply and implement the EJ framework. And so our conditions are: 1, expand the scope of how we measure the efficacy of council projects through a broad EJ lens. 2, build upon current council structures and processes to define EJ as a necessary and explicit component of council work. And 3, reconcile the council with overburdened communities through shared EJ values. So now I will hand it over to my colleague Laura.
Thanks, Sarah. Can everyone hear me? Right?
Yes.
Great. So the 3 components of the framework are here on your screen. We'll go over each of them in detail, but to start with, the first component is people-centered, data-driven decision-making, which reflects the contextualized component of the equity framework. The second is prioritizing engagement with overburdened communities, which reflects the community-centered component of the equity framework. And lastly, that community benefits go beyond harm mitigation, which reflects the reparative component of the equity framework. I'll start with the first component, in which we really look to inform decisions using data from the lived experiences of overburdened communities. This looks like using both quantitative and qualitative data to value the present and historical experiences of overburdened communities, and also identifying, addressing, and being transparent about practices that might be perpetuating environmental injustice. And lastly, understanding that there are environmental harms that are not accounted for by existing regulations. Existing regulations do a lot to account for some environmental harms, but there are certainly impacts in communities that we need to know specifically from communities what those are in order to really understand and investigate those harms. The second component is prioritizing engagement with overburdened communities. This has been a theme of tonight's conversation, and so hopefully we can provide some additional context and information about the details that the Regional Development Guide will take in this area. So the way that the environmental justice framework puts forward these ideas and processes of how we do engagement includes building reparative and respectful relationships that are aware of communities' autonomy as well as their capacity for providing input and engaging in these processes, doing early and iterative engagement processes so there's enough time to give informed input, and then really looking toward co-creating policy with community partners while continuing to collaborate with the partner agencies that the council works with. And the third component is around community benefits. How do we look at community benefits that go beyond harm mitigation? And this reminded me of the conversation about the word abundance. I think this is a great parallel to that we're ensuring that the benefits of the council's work meet the community's self-identified needs, and that we're not just mitigating harm, which is what much current environmental justice policy work does, but building those benefits and building that abundance. This also involves being transparent about what the investments and benefits are, and then documenting and publicly reporting EJ-related benchmarks and metrics so we can see, are we actually making progress? Are the outcomes actually occurring as we're doing this work? So those are the three components of the framework. In terms of next steps, the council has been building this EJ commitment from existing adopted council plans, like Sarah referenced earlier. And we've been working to embed these EJ principles across all of our planning efforts. So our EJ task force team has reviewed and continues to review all of the policy plans that Lisa and Charles presented on earlier to look at how they're incorporating environmental justice and make recommendations on that aspect of those plans. We're currently developing metrics and implementation measures that will go with the environmental justice framework and continuing to coordinate with our agency partners on this work as well. So I'll pass it back over to Sarah for our final slides.
Thank you, Laura. So our final slides regard the public comment process and engagement with the public comment process. Now, we understand that, you know, the way things are, business as usual, and our standard public comment process is not as inclusive and meaningful as it needs to be. And so what the EJ Task Force would really like to do is to expand this public comment process to reflect our equity framework and our commitments that we have outlined in the RDG. And so we have drafted a menu of engagement based on the IAP2 spectrum of engagement, as well as with coordination of other policy teams. We would like to build relationships with communities and present a menu to really respect their capacity, give them time to honor their time to give informed input, and also meet them where they're at physically, emotionally, and take time to explain what our processes are. Potential methods might include group conversations, one-on-one meetings, attending the organization's existing meetings, and then other community organizations suggested ways to remain engaged. So it's not just us going to them and saying, hey, here are your options. We want to also understand, how would you like to be engaged? How do you want your voice heard? Desired actions that we would like to do is provide translations and disability accommodations. So language translations, plain language, and then also perhaps printed materials with large text or other accommodations that are needed. Physically meeting communities where they feel comfortable. So for example, we have in the youth engagements that Lisa Barajas mentioned, we have an ongoing relationship with COPAL. They are a frontline environmental justice community, and they, you know, told us, if you engage with us, you're welcome to come into our space where we feel comfortable and safe. Also providing times outside of the quote unquote typical 9 to 5 work hours, just like we're doing right now. Then also offering compensation as the communities see fit. And then informing communities on how their feedback informed our work. Oftentimes, historically, you know, people share their voices and then don't know what happened with them or how their feedback was integrated. And so we, you know, to really reflect and honor and act upon our framework, would like to have an iterative approach and really work alongside communities. And so those are desired actions that we would like to do. And so with that, we do have questions for feedback, but I'd also like to open space and hold space for you all to ask any questions that you might have of us.
Mercedes, so my question is it you two that are leading this initiative, like the committee, you two?
It is, well, myself and Angela Torres, and Laura is a really active present member.
Okay, cause I just found it interesting, like you had a slide where it talked about like grassroots values with like a Black woman, and you guys don't leave it like that. So I just think about how you're going to try and do engagement work with communities, and I can already see, like, I'm from the Rondo community, no one's going to like even like come talk to you or like give you information, because they're same with North Minneapolis. I don't see like any successful engagement happening. Like this kind of work needs to be done by somebody who reflects the community. It just reminds me of like the education system where like I would be working in behavior and then they'll send a white woman in to tell me how to work with Black and brown kids. And I'm just like, okay. Or like St. Paul City Council had hired an Asian woman to oversee reparations for Rondo. Like, it's like, not to be like, I'm just being honest.
Yeah, we really hear that, we understand that. We do have representation on our team, and that is, you know, but we completely understand that, you know, we're not entitled to a community's trust. We don't reflect the community. And I think that is certainly a challenge that we will experience, and I would really, you know, ask the EAC to provide insight on how we should go about building relationships, how we can how we can partner with communities so that we feel safe. I think I think that is a big challenge that we'll have to grapple with.
Yeah, thank you for your honesty. I recognize that as a white person coming into spaces that I do have to earn that trust. So I really appreciate your comment. Thank you.
I just want your guys' work to be beneficial and so.
Councilor Carter?
Hey, one thing I would recommend is you could create a position for outreach partners. And you could have outreach partners. First of all, you want to identify the particular communities that you want to reach out to and identify outreach partners. And in that case, you do have an affirmative hire in the direction of that person being culturally based. And so again, they do reflect that community. And many times you can also, you have people that are already engaged directly in those communities who built trust over years. And you can reach those individuals, and so they already have that community's trust. And so if you utilize those individuals, you're gonna go in deep. You're not gonna go in on a superficial level. Like, you know, we came to tell you what you need to do for yourself. You know, they're gonna come in with partnership and very authentic.
Thank you, Dr.
Before I
Carter.
take some more questions, just to let you all know that we're gonna take the next item, again, it actually ties right into what we're doing right now, community center engagement, and put that into our August meeting. So I don't wanna shortchange anyone, I'm sorry for the folks that are here to make the presentation, but to do it justice, we'll move that whole presentation to the August meeting. We'll also entertain the possibility of doing the safety and having the police chief at the same time at that meeting as well. So that's another issue that was brought up. So with that, we do have a few time for some questions or suggestions. Excuse me, yeah?
Yeah, I would just like to quickly respond. Thank you, Dr. Carter, for your comment. I think this really addresses, you know, the concern that you raised is a concern that we had as well, and we didn't want to tokenize staff. We didn't want to make Black staff feel like they were doing jobs that they were not hired to do and working outside of their described job responsibilities. And so, Dr. Carter, your suggestion is something that is an excellent thing that we will act upon. Thank you.
Committee member?
Anita Ravina Davis. I've been involved in EJ for probably over 10 years, and I know Representative Mitchell Hanson is also doing some EJ work specifically in North Minneapolis where we live. There is the North Side Green Zone and the South Side Green Zone. And they both have representatives of people who live in North Minneapolis, diverse representation. And so I would recommend that you connect with both of those groups. They meet separately, but they also, on a quarterly basis, they meet as a bigger, larger group. And specifically centered around the issues of near North Side and near South Side Minneapolis, where equity, environmental justice and equity has always been an issue and, you know, remains an issue. And so the group is very active. And they meet monthly. So those are two recommendations per, you know, request.
Thank you so much.
Also, the MPCA has an environmental justice advisory.
I'm on it.
Oh, I used to sit on it. So that's another opportunity for you to get diverse information. There is environmental initiative. And I know Commissioner Cedarberg and I both sit on the Environmental Initiative Board. And so she's been giving me some updates about environmental justice with the Met Council because she's keeping an eye on it. But some feedback might be, you know, coming from her on other groups that you can engage with in the future. And I think a lot of us who are sitting here have been involved in EJ. I mean, it's just a given. If we live in impacted communities, it's a given that environmental justice is one of our basic issues. Because it is about our civil rights and it is about our equity.
Committee,
Thank you.
Thank you.
One, you mentioned transparency in your early slides, and I wonder how that commitment to transparency is being operationalized. I know that systems like to post things on their website and then say that we were transparent, but the community doesn't necessarily engage frequently with those spaces. So I would encourage the use of things like social media or community newsletters or, you know, places where people actually go to get their information as opposed to expecting community to come to your platform for transparency.
Yeah.
And then you also talked about doing community engagement within the capacity of the communities that you are engaging with. I again would encourage building capacity as well. There are lots of groups that are already engaged around environmental justice issues. But as was mentioned, these are issues that impact the entire community, right? So, you know, there might be school groups where parents are concerned about, you know, their kids' academics, or groups that are concerned about disability and don't know that the issues that they're addressing are directly related to or have a correlation with environmental justice, who you could spend some time educating about that interplay and empowering them to then give you feedback about how what research is saying is playing out in their community as well.
Thank you.
any other comments? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. One other suggestion is you mentioned a little bit earlier that you are attempting to go to the places where people feel most comfortable to hear their voices. I would add to that, intentionally listen to voices that are already being raised, but maybe not being raised in forums that you're familiar with. I think some of the suggestions that other members of this committee have made might get you a little closer to those existing platforms, forums, places, because my guess is that voices are already being raised about a number of issues, and if you are going to those platforms, you will hear a lot of the input that you're looking for.
Thank you.
Okay.
And along that line, some of those voices that are being raised have been a bit of a nuisance or are not super popular, or, you know, I encourage us not to exclude people because we know that we don't necessarily agree with what they have to say.
Thank you.
And I'll just add here, your questions and your, comments even going forward is that this is an advisory. I mean, the whole purpose that we're engaged today is to advise other departments on what they're doing. And so they look forward to bringing things forward. So if you have any suggestions, please just write them down, shoot them to us or shoot them to Lila and her team. When we've walked out or when we've been to council meetings, they've asked, the advisory, and we've been able to bring things back. And some of the questions you had tonight was very helpful in their presentation as well. So please, anytime you feel like you want something you'd like to expand on or us to expand on, please feel free to do it, because that is really the purpose of this body. With that, it's just a few minutes. Yep.
It's just a few words.
All right.
Yeah, Minneapolis-St. Paul Long-Term Ecological Research. They do this work already. They work with community. They're really good. They're probably the best place to go for this, and they're currently working on a lot of cool projects. And I think they're a really good link, and I think community does have trust and respect for them. So, and they're very, very smart. So.
Thank you.
All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
So moved in second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you again, this has been very helpful.
Thank you.
See you guys next month.